יונתן, כולם התחילו, ירושלים. Welcome, Mrs. Budenbender, good to see you. יונתן, תאפשר שיוכלו להוריד את המיוט.
הם יכולים.
Mrs. Budenbender, you're on mute, I'm sorry. Can you unmute yourself, please?
Sorry, so now I got it. Hi, nice to meet you all. I'm so happy. Hi, do you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Okay, wonderful.
Okay,
Hi.
so we will start. We will
Okay.
start Yerushalayim, we are ready. מורנט ניסימן לדניאלה שאפשר להתחיל.
מה היה לשנים?
צריך להוריד את המיוט בבית הנשיא.
Is Maya Buenos. I'm sorry again to all of our viewers, good afternoon. My name is Maya Buenos and I am honored to host this special Zikaron B'Salon from the presidential residence here in Jerusalem in the presence of Israel's First Lady, Mrs. Michal Herzog, and in the presence of Germany First Lady, Mrs. Elka Budenbeder, who is joining us from Germany. We welcome our speaker, Holocaust survivor, Charles Siegman and his wife, Gita. Also with us today, German Ambassador Dr. Vazum Reiner, the wife of Israeli Ambassador to Germany, Mrs. Laura Kem, Mrs. Lera Schnierer, students and young professionals from Israel and Germany. Welcome and thank you for joining us today. Zikaron B'Salon is an Israeli initiative commemorating the Holocaust. We would think that after the last 2 years, it would seem almost obvious that we'll create our own personal, intimate memorial gatherings in our living rooms. But the idea of such events, the idea of Zikaron B'Salon, started a decade ago. In the last 10 years, a new way of remembering has begun. Hundreds of thousands of gatherings took place, and in last year alone, over 1.5 million people took part in such gatherings in 55 countries around the globe. I would like to invite the Honorable Mrs. Michal Herzog for opening remarks.
Thank you, Maya.
It is an honor for me to mark this year's International Holocaust Remembrance Day by taking part in this important event of Zikaron B'Salon, which literally means memory in your living room. Together with the First Lady of Germany, my good friend, Ms. Elke Budenbender, the fact that we are leading this together shows more than anything else that there is hope and that together we can bring a better future. Such an important initiative puts an emphasis on remembering and not letting the stories of the past be forgotten, but rather keeping the memories alive. And I also welcome to this important gathering the German ambassador in Israel, Dr. Suzanne Wassum-Reiner, and Mrs. Laura Kam, the wife of the Israeli ambassador in Berlin. Here with me today is in the president's residence in Jerusalem, our host, survivor Charles Yechiel Siegman, who will share his story with us together with his wife, Gita Siegman. Thank you so much for joining us and honoring us with your presence. And I found the words of the poet Sonia Weitz, a survivor herself of Plaszow and Auschwitz, originally from Krakow. Her words capture in her poem, Forgetting is Dangerous, the essence of our need to remember. When memory dies in the face of lies, hope is crushed forever, and prayers are severed, and dreams are forsaken. But if we awaken and dare to care, all things are possible, even undoing future genocides, even preserving our planet Earth. We have the power to plant a flower, to love a child, to save a tree, to be free, to be one with the rising sun, but only if we remember that forgetting is dangerous. I am honored to pass the floor to my friend, Ms. Elke Budenbender.
Thanks a lot, Michelle. That was a very moving poem. Excellency, dear Michelle Herzog, dear friend, dear Mr. Siegman, dear Mrs. Siegman, dear Laura Kam, dear Mrs. Blevis, dear viewers in Israel and Germany. Tomorrow is International Holocaust Remembrance Day. 2 years ago, my husband, the federal president, and I were in Jerusalem for this important day. And my husband had the honor to give a speech in Yad Vashem as the first German president, and this was so a very moving moment for us. But also, I did have the honor to participate in my first Zikaron B'Salon event. I spoke to Marianne Korman that day, and what evolved from that is not less than a wonderful, long-lasting friendship. Apart from the opportunity to meet this wonderful human being, it is the idea behind Zikaron B'Salon initiative that I truly appreciate. What my fellow countrymen did at the time of the National Socialism is never to happen again. We need to keep up the memory. We need to keep the stories of the Holocaust survivors and the stories of all the victims alive. We must never forget. And that's why I think it's a wonderful idea to bring Holocaust survivors and young people together. Hearing real stories is so much more touching and moving than reading abstracts in history books, which are important as well, of course. This is why I feel very honored to have been part in 2 Zikaron B'Salon already. Apart from Mrs. Carmen, I had the honor to meet Mrs. Sarah Goodman in January of last year in a virtual Zikaron B'Salon event. She's also such an amazing woman. Last year in November, I was given an award on the occasion of the first Zikaron B'Salon seminar, which I'm very grateful for. But again, I want to empathize that I think that is actually the people behind Zikaron B'Salon initiative who deserve this award for their great idea and for their enthusiasm to keep the memory. Thank you very much for everything you do in this regard. I also would like to thank you, Mrs. Herzog, dear Yechiel, for doing this Zikaron Barcelona event with me today. This makes it even more special for me. I still hope to be able to come to Israel soon, and then I would love to do another Zikaron Barcelona with you there. Dear Mrs. Wasson-Reiner, dear Laura, thank you for taking the time to join us tonight for this so important event. And above all, I want to thank you, Mr. Siegman, for being with us tonight and sharing your story with us. I can imagine that it's not easy to talk about the past, so I feel very honored and I'm very grateful that you still do. And I'm looking forward to our exchange later on. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Budenbender, and thank you, Mrs. Herzog, German Ambassador to Israel. Dr. Wasson-Reiner, I invite you to say a few words.
Thank you so much, Mr. Siegman, Mrs. Siegman, Mrs. Herzog, Mrs. Budenbender, dear volunteers of Zikaron Besalon. Thank you very much for having me again this year for Zikaron Besalon on the occasion of the International Holocaust Remembrance Day. I'm deeply moved and deeply grateful that I'm allowed to take part once again. Of course, I clearly remember last year's extraordinary Zikaron Besalon with Mrs. Budenbender, and I'm very touched for her new presence today, this time side by side with Mrs. Michal Herzog. What a moving symbol to see you together, commemorating together the victims of the Shoah. It gives me to think about our common commitment, visible again last week, when Israel and Germany presented together a forceful resolution against distortion and denial of the Holocaust in the United Nations, a resolution that was adopted with overwhelming majority. A heartfelt thanks to all of you volunteers of Zikaron Besalon who are making this encounter tonight and all the many others possible again. With your intimate way to commemorate, you have become a most powerful institution in the necessity and the necessary work of remembrance of the Shoah. Germany assumes the historic responsibility for the Shoah and the crimes committed in the name of the National Socialist ideology. Germany is committed to work for a better future while never forgetting the past. Our fight against anti-Semitism, racism, discrimination, and exclusion is firmly enshrined in that conviction that the dignity of every human being is untouchable and that the universal human rights are the guiding principle of all our actions. And I'm so grateful for the Israeli friendship with us today. Thank you very much, Mr. Siegman, agreeing to share your story in the framework of this event. I wish you all, especially all the young people among us, all the students participating today at this Zikaron Besalon, a very special encounter, that this event will stay with you and that it stays an unforgettable experience for all of you. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. I invite Mrs. Laura Kem to say a few words.
Thank you. Greetings from Berlin. As the daughter of Holocaust survivors, I would like to thank Zikaron Besalon for its important work. First Ladies Elke Budenbender and Michal Herzog, your presence is so important, as is Ambassadors Wasson-Reiner. And to Charles Siegman, thank you so much for sharing your story. Nothing is more important, especially during these dark days for the Jewish community, both in Israel and around the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much. As a representative of the third generation, I may ask if I'm even able to remember. For how can we remember an event we didn't take part in? But even if I don't have the answer, I believe we can say never again by bringing the memory of the Holocaust into our hearts and into our homes. And this is what we are doing today. I welcome Holocaust survivor, Mr. Charles Siegman, to share his testimony with us.
Thank you, First Lady Mrs. Herzog and First Lady Mrs. Burdenbender for the privilege of sharing my experiences and reflections of being a child survivor on International Holocaust Remembrance Day. My name is Charles Yechiel Siegman, born in 1935, the youngest of 5 children, in Scheveningen, Holland, a beach resort near The Hague. Our parents operated a wholesale postage business, including servicing neighboring countries. When the Germans invaded Holland in May 1940, they took command of the radio, utilities, railways, the press, and nationalized major industries, including many belonging to Jews. Over time, restrictions were imposed. Jews were required to wear a yellow Star of David, Yod. They were no longer permitted to mix with Aryans in schools and parks. There were evening curfews, and they were not allowed to leave the country, even for business. Jews were selectively arrested and sent to Westerbork, Holland, major concentration camp. I started first grade in that environment and sensed that things at home were no longer the same. Conversations by our parents were hushed and our food was limited because our parents' businesses was suffering. Our parents decided to split the family and place the 3 youngest children in safe homes, such as nursing mothers, a tuberculosis hospital, and the like. Meantime, our parents and brothers, Aaron and Joseph, waited anxiously for receiving papers from neutral countries that our relatives in Switzerland were arranging. Our father would pick us up from the safe homes in the morning to go to synagogue and checking on our welfare. One morning when he did not appear, we realized that our parents and brothers had been rounded up for deportation to Westerbork. The last memory I have of my father was sitting on his lap with the big tefillin phylacteries on his head. The pattern of the Nazis was that those on the transport list would be packed into cattle cars on Monday, on Tuesday, and shipped to Auschwitz or Sobibor. Our parents and brothers were put on the list a few weeks after arriving in Westerbork. From the cattle cars, people threw out postcards or letters, which many locals posted. We received a postcard where our mother told us to take good care of each other and reminded us that we have relatives in Switzerland. Our older brothers added, "Lehitraot," see you again. This was the last we heard from our parents and brothers. Upon arrival in Auschwitz, they were immediately gassed. We 3 children were now on our own. A few weeks later, the Nazis rounded up children, including ourselves, from the different orphanages in Holland to be deported to Westerbork. There, we faced the same fate as our parents and brothers. However, there was an outbreak of scarlet fever in the children's barracks. To protect their soldiers, the Nazis put quarantine on the children's barracks. We were then put on the transport list for the following Monday. On the Shabbat before papers for Honduras arrived, but unfortunately, too late for our parents and brothers. These papers spared us from being transported to death camps. A few years ago, we learned that our Honduran papers were part of an effort by the Lados Group, consisting of Polish, other diplomats, and Jewish organizations in Bern to obtain forged documents for neutral Latin and Central American countries. For these, the Jews paid a hefty sum. This changed our status as the Nazis needed such people for prisoner exchange, medications, and materials for their war effort. The Nazis didn't know what to do with us 3 children, as we were not suitable for barter, and they needed space for additional arrivals to be shipped east. They transferred us for 1 month to Amersfoort, a political prisoner concentration camp. After that, in Westerbork, we were requested to appear before the Gestapo. While waiting in line, a Dutch lawyer advised my brother to tell the Gestapo that we had relatives in Switzerland. Leo was asked whether he spoke Honduran. He told them we had relatives in Switzerland and mumbled other responses. To this day, we don't know whether the Gestapo posed the trick question or didn't know that the language spoken in Honduras was Spanish. After a year in Westerbork, in February 1944, we were sent to Terezin in Czechoslovakia. The Terezin was used for people with privileged status, such as the leader of the World Reform Movement, Rabbi Leon Beck, former Prime Minister of France, Leon Blum, the neurologist Viktor Frankl, scientists, and other dignitaries. While conditions were better in Terezin than in death and slave labor camps, they were very meager. Terezin was built to house the Czech army of about 7,000 soldiers. The Nazis converted it to hold as many as 58 inmates in overcrowded, cold, unsanitary, and disease-ridden conditions, with 35,000 people dying in Terezin, 150 each day. They died from malnutrition, disease, and old age. Our living quarters were primitive, no privacy. Lily was by herself in the women's section. Leo and I were together on the 3rd level bunk bed in the men's section. We had straw mattresses with nighttime visitors, bed bugs. Each inmate was given a metal bowl, spoon, cup, and a monthly ration card. Leo and Lily told me that I never lost any of these. Food lines were outside the barracks. In the morning, there was coffee, and if there was any leftover bread from the soldiers, breakfast. The other 2 meals consisted of string beans, more strings than beans, potatoes that were mostly peels, dark bread, and barley soup. If one was at the beginning of the soup line, he got liquid. And if at the end of the line, there was no soup left. We became streetwise and quickly learned to sneak into the middle of the line. And people were nice to us 3 kids. Twice a week, there was meat, horse meat. Our religious upbringing taught us that horse meat was not kosher, but the rabbis were told us we must eat it in order to survive. The Nazis did not want children to have skills and knowledge should they survive. Thus, education was prohibited. But a number of adults were eager to provide some instruction to us in the evening in an attic. A person stood outside should a Gestapo come to inspect. Then we would switch to playing games, as in the Hanukkah story. They taught us arithmetic, history, geography with maps of Israel, and about Jewish holidays and some songs. To lift our spirits, we sang Shomer Yisrael, Shomer She'erit Yisrael, Guardian of Israel, guard the remnant of Israel, and Sim Shalom, grant peace, from the liturgy. Both songs were sung in rounds. To keep busy, Leo and I were assigned to do office work at the Jewish Council, and Lily collected ashes from the crematorium. The day also consisted of outside roll calls in all kinds of weather. For a child, I led a drab life. I did not have steady friends, as new people kept arriving and leaving. When they were youngsters, we played with a Monopoly game made out of paper, used the tin can for a football, and roamed around permissible barracks. Religious observances were limited. In the Jewish Council building, there was a minyan on Shabbat, scheduled early to enable inmates to go to work. Around Pesach, Leo and I saved our potato rations for Lily to, quote, bake matzah for Passover. Lily's version is that she was given the potatoes to bake a birthday cake for herself. Leo became bar mitzvah in January 1945, and people helped him prepare. A Czech scientist who had 2 sets of tefillin gave Leo his small travel tefillin. The Nazis, facing hardships, were eager to acquire medicines and critical supplies for waging the war, and sought the support of the International Red Cross. Before our arrival, the Nazis took a section of Terezin, beautified it, transforming it into a functional resort with cafes, a football field, false money, flower shops, concerts, and the like. They selected Czech-speaking people so that the Red Cross would not be able to converse with them. They invited the International Red Cross to inspect how well the Jews were living in Terezin. They were escorted to the new resort, bypassing the rest of the camp. The delegation fell for this propaganda ruse and agreed to obtain the items requested by the Nazis. The Nazis made a propaganda film of the resort to counter charges that they were mistreating the Jewish camp inmates. They even issued a press release that declared, quote, while the Jews are sitting in cafes, drinking coffee, eating cake and dancing, while our soldiers have to bear all the burdens of a terrible war, its miseries and deprivations to defend their motherland. After the delegation left, the Nazis destroyed the resort and transported to Auschwitz all those who were involved in the propaganda in order to destroy evidence of this fraud and prevent those who were forced to be part of the scheme for revealing that the resort was staged. Nevertheless, the Red Cross, as a goodwill gesture, offered to take in 1,000 of the inmates who had corrections to Swiss citizens. We were advised to forego this offer as it might be a ruse. The inmates who did go on the Freedom Train were asked to report back by the following code. If correct, write back a particular phrase, but if not, write another phrase. As it turned out, the train did go to Switzerland, and we missed that opportunity. The war took a turn for the worse for Germany, and they decided to accelerate the transports, initially to Auschwitz and later to other death camps. We were rejected for the next train that we were told was going to Switzerland, but instead went to the death camp. We were then put on the next list, but somehow distantly related inmates went to the Jewish Council and asked them to leave the children alone. The train also ended in a death camp. The scarcity of working railroads for the Germans made them decide to bring the gas to Theresen, and a gas chamber was built, but fortunately never used. We were again put on a list, unaware of the new gas chamber in Theresen. However, with the Germans now focused on destroying evidence and escaping themselves, so once again, we were spared. At roll call now, we saw the Russians approaching and watched the Nazis fleeing with their bags. One soldier threw a hand grenade to us for good luck. Fortunately, it did not go off. The formal liberation by the Russian army took place on May 9th, 1945. The Russians shared their rations with inmates and tossed candies to the children. My first candy in 2.5 years. At the same time, I saw a Russian soldier grab a watch from a woman. And later I learned that some soldiers assaulted the women. We were fortunate to be liberated by the Russians, who had limited food supplies compared with the British, Canadian, or Americans, who opened their kitchens. And many people got sick and some died as they couldn't absorb the volume of the rich foods. We had relatives in Holland who survived the war in hiding, Joseph and Peppy Berger. When they learned that we survived, they took the 3 of us in. The Berger's 2 children were hidden separately and had to live elsewhere when we arrived. We started Jewish school, but in lower grades, of course. We also went to Hachshara in Hilversum on Sundays with the Berger's children who were planning to go to on Aliyah. We stayed with the Bergers in Amsterdam for almost a year. 75% of Dutch Jewry was killed in the Holocaust, the highest percentage in Western Europe. Survivors who started coming back to Holland wanted to get out of Europe as quickly as possible. We heard horror stories of what people went through. When parents who placed their children in the custody of the church, such as convents, wanted to retrieve them, they often met with resistance by the church and sometimes by the children as well. I remember the distinguished Chief Rabbi Herzog with his top hat, who went throughout Europe to deal with this problem, coming to our synagogue in Amsterdam when he was on this difficult mission, and he shared tragic stories with the public. The Bergers made contact with our mother's sister in Zurich and our father's brother in New York. Both wanted all 3 of us, but it was decided that Lily would go to Zurich and us boys to New York, where we would get a better Jewish education. In mid-June of 1946, the Joint arranged to pick up children in Europe who were heading to the United States. We traveled on the Marine Flasher to New York. We were raised by our uncle Mendel and Aunt Susie Siegman, who had 6 children of their own. They provided for all our needs, and for which I'm eternally grateful. In contrast to my lost childhood, where I went through the war and lost my parents and brothers, my subsequent life has been very rich and fulfilling. I had a comprehensive education both secular and yeshiva education, and university education as well. I had a wonderful career, teaching economics for 9 years at the college level, followed by working for 31 years at the United States Central Bank, the Federal Reserve Board, in senior positions, and then as an advisor at the International Monetary Fund. I am blessed with a wonderful wife of almost 60 years.
Wow.
And 4 children, 13 grandchildren, 6 great-grandchildren. Kei Yirbu, may they multiply. We are all grateful for the privilege of living in Israel, something our parents and grandparents would only have dreamt about. We are proud of our 4 grandsons who served in the army and 3 granddaughters who served in Sherut Leumi, the national service. Now some reflections of my experience. As I reflect on being a child Holocaust survivor, I realized that I was not in the driver's seat. I didn't do anything to survive, neither my strength nor my wisdom. Decisions were made by others. I felt like I was driftwood, going from here to there. But my fate was determined by God's invisible hand. Being a survivor did not entitle me to any special privileges or excuses for any shortcomings. While never forgetting the loss of parents and older brothers, I was determined to be forward-looking. I valued education after being deprived of education as a child. I want to be judged by my achievements and not by being a Shoah survivor. For many survivors, their war experiences presented a challenge to their faith. Where was God? Why did he allow this to happen? But the question should be, where was civilized man? The Nazis were determined to destroy not only the Jewish people, but also Judaism itself. Abandoning my faith would have meant giving the Nazis a victory. The importance of a strong Israel cannot be overestimated. With very few exceptions, the civilized world closed their borders to Jews who were facing extermination. The British mandate closed the doors to Palestine and sent boats back to Europe. Canada's policy was, none is too many. The United States did not fill quotas for European countries, etc., etc. The Jews now have a welcoming haven in time of need. Therefore, we must give Israel full support. It is essential that the world remembers the Holocaust. This is urgent, as the survivors will not be with us much longer to bear witnesses. It is frightening to know that there are people who deny that the Holocaust never happened. I am witness today, and I urge you to take the role of being a witness about Shoah in the years to come. After the war, anti-Semites went underground for a while, but now there is widespread public resurgence of anti-Semitism, which spills over to anti-Israel propaganda and hate. Finally, Germany came close to winning the war. Fortunately, they did not succeed. Therefore, in a sense, we are all survivors. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Siegman, for sharing your testimony with us and for your moving message of survival, not only your own survival, but the survival of the Jewish culture, legacy, beliefs, and values. Thank you. It means the world to us. Before we'll begin our conversation, I would like to turn to Mayan Blevis, an Israeli musician, to perform for us and to give us an opportunity to reflect on Mr. Siegman's words. Mayan.
Hi, do you hear me?
Yeah.
Very well, thank you.
So this is a song by Chana Senesh and composed by David Zehavi. It's called Helicha LeKeisaria, A Walk to Keisaria. The words say, Eli, Eli, Shelo Yigamer Leolam. My God, please let these few things, very humble request, a few things to stay forever. The hush of the waves, the sand of the sea, the limitless sky, and the human prayers. Eli, Eli, שלא ייגמר לעולם, החול והים, רישוש של המים, ברק השמיים, תפילת האדם, החול והים, רישוש של המים, ברק השמיים, תפילת האדם. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maayan. For our discussion, I would like to address the first question to Mrs. Leah Schnierer, the daughter of Olga Grossman Shalom, who survived Holocaust and the cruel experiments by Mendele when she was 5 years old. Mrs. Schnierer, as a representative of the second generation, I would like to ask you, why do you think it is important to pass on the memory of the Holocaust to future generations in a public way? Why it is important that it won't be just your own personal family's story?
Hey everybody, I'm very, very excited to be part of this Zikaron Basalon, and I'm very attached by this meaning, like always, but as really a daughter of my mom that really went through all the experiments of Dr. Mengele when she was one of the twins at 5 years old. The message that always, I was born to this. I was really born as a miracle, and I was actually the doll that she never had. But through me, I was born as with a mission. And I felt it from the second moment that I came to this world, that I came with a mission to pass it on. Through me, my mother went through childhood. Through me, my mother became a grown up. And through me, she got able to smile because all the memories came to her later on. And we actually don't know what she have been through because when I went to Auschwitz 2 years ago, still the house number 10 is closed and we don't know exactly at the ghetto what they did with them. I think that each one of us that was born as a second generation was born really with a mission to pass all these stories, especially to the people, especially to the young people that came, because really, you know, my mother is 83 and God bless, she's okay. But I think we have to pass it on, that this thing will not happen again, but most of all to say to this story of each one of the survivors. They were heroes. We got Israel because of them. We got a beautiful land, and they are the heroes. As my mother said, she was blessed that she got out of it. She was blessed that you could have children. A lot, if she went through all these experiments when she was 16 or 15, 16 years old, probably she couldn't have children. So she was blessed. And this blessing, she wants to pass it on. And we have to pass on that these all survivors, that heroes, they are we have to show how this and why not this situation will be really happened again with all that's going on now in the world. And as I went all through the world with my personal story to a lot of countries, and I always say that is really each one of us, and no matter if it's Jewish people, if it's Muslim, if it's Catholic, everybody has to hear more and more. And I see how people want to hear the stories of the Holocaust, because I think that this is our really, this is what
the true mission that you're
is all for. And I think the story of the Jewish people, all through the world they went, is to show how it came from strength, how strong we can get out of all the pain that these people went through. And this is really my message to all. And I see all over the world how eager is the people that they want to hear and to hear and to hear that these things will not happen again. We have to remember not to forget and to show how and to be proud of those survivors that are here, because they are really our heroes.
Thank you so much for this very important message. I would like to turn to our audience. We have two questions. Our first question, Noah from Haifa.
Hello, thank you so much for this honor. I'm calling from Haifa, but I'm originally from the US. I'm the grandson of survivors. My grandmother still lives at 97. And I'm just a recent graduate of the Weiss Livnat International Masters in Holocaust Studies. The one thing that I'm very curious about, Mrs. Budenbender, is what was it like to learn about the Holocaust when you were a child? And how do you see the memory play out among the youth in Germany today?
Thank you very much for the question. First of all, I have to thank you, Mr. Siegman, for his heartbreaking story. And I think who didn't face the challenges you face and the cruelty that you face, I think we can't really understand, but we can try to understand. And it means the world to me that I'm allowed to listen to your story and tell your story in Germany. Thanks. First of all, thanks a lot, Mr. Siegman. So to your question, I think I don't forget your forename. Can you repeat it?
Yes, my name is Noah Kraft.
Noah, thanks a lot. Yeah, thanks a lot, Noah. Yes, when I was 12 years old, my grandmother gave me the book of Anne Frank, and she told me about the girl who was hidden in Netherlands, and she told me her story, and that was the very first time I think that I heard, that I got deep into the Holocaust story of and of the people who suffered and the children who were killed. And actually, she told me she was not in the resistance or so, but I know that she and her family don't vote for the Nazis, but that's all. But she told me, Elke, when everyone says to you, he don't know what happened, then he is a liar. We all knew what happened to our Jewish neighbors. She grew up in a very little village. And that I remember so well, and that went deep in my heart. And from then on, I read a lot of these stories. I talked to my parents, and I had the luck, I had very good teachers who taught me about the Holocaust. And so I grew up with the story of what happened to our Jewish fellow men and women in my country, and that moved me a lot, and that is part of my life since I was a young girl. And I think it's very important that we do right this, what we are doing now, hearing stories and also talking to young people. At my last Siegman Salon meeting here in Berlin, we met young women who were grandchildren or even grand-grandchildren. And the young lady was very moved when she said to us that she had the feeling she didn't ask enough her grandparents about this story, and she was near to tears. And what I learned is that history goes on. It affected every life in Israel of a lot of people and in the Jewish community around the world. Of course, in Germany. And in Germany, we had this unbelievable anti-Semitism, murderous events. And my husband, federal president, had the duty, and he did it every time, and challenged this what grew up in Germany again. And yeah, it's not over. We have to fight, and we have to remember, and we have to tell the stories, and we have to teach our young people, and we have to talk to them.
Thank you, Ms. Budenbender, for your reply. We have another question from our audience, Carla from Berlin. Carla? Okay. Carla, you're on mute.
Yes, I'm here. I actually didn't have a question.
You don't have a question. So I have a question, to be honest. And my question is to you, Mr. Siegman. You spoke of survival, and again, you spoke of Jewish values. And when I think of surviving, especially the events that you needed to survive, how does one keep his faith? How do you remain a human being in this time of horrors?
Well, I was fortunate that I was raised after the war, in a home of people who were active in the Jewish communities and were good role models that helped. Given that I experienced the Shoah on myself, the worst parts were when I was a young child. I was, oddly enough, blessed, quotation marks, that I was too young to understand the gravity that I was exposed to. Nevertheless, I read literature, attended lectures, and studies where people did raise this question of where was God? Well, I'm not the one to be the accuser of God at this stage of the game. And as I pointed out, the question was, where were the world, the civilized people, the professors, the politicians, the silence? Had everybody been upright, we would have been a different world.
So what do you think is the message that we should live with today?
Well, the message should be people individually living upright lives. Don't expect much from politicians, if I may say. It has to come on the ground. People have to be exposed. And above all, unwind the disgraceful denial of the event, which was so visible, oddly enough, and so much proof that it existed, that people still, and large numbers, unfortunately, are still denying it. So we have to educate everyone so we avoid having this again. We should naturally have a global view as well. It's not just the Jews. What happened to us Jews, unfortunately, could spread to others.
I think, first of all, thank you very much. And I think your story and your personal history and the fact that you're both here, you and Gita, your wife, and your children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, shows how important it is to keep telling the story so that we learn from your stories and we don't forget. And I think this is really the essence of us getting together and listening because time moves on, but we have to move it to the next generation and the generation after, and never forget. And thank you very, very much for sharing your story with us.
And maybe it will be a good time.
Yes, and I'm honored on behalf, if you allow me, Mrs. Budenbender, on behalf of you and myself and the Zikaron Basalon team, to thank you, Charles, very, very much, and present you with this thank you, very small token of thanks for sharing your very moving and very, very important experience with a lot of young people that learn, that listen, and they will take the story with them moving forward. Thank you very, very much.
Many thanks.
Here, I will help you here. Thank you.
And I would like to conclude and to thank you again, Mr. Siegman, to thank you, Mrs. Budenbender, and to thank you, Mrs. Herzog, for having us and creating this extraordinary Zikaron Basalon. For my final remark, I will mention a Jewish poet, Polish poet by the name of Władysław Szlengel. A few days ago, I read one of his poems, Telephone. In this poem, he spoke of the loss of his friendships with the Poles beyond the ghetto walls. And for me, I'm quite moved right now, I apologize. But for me to sit here in a living room that brings different generations and different countries and different people to the same place, saying all together, there are no sides here. We all wish to speak, to discuss, to remember, to listen. It's quite extraordinary. So again, thank you very much for all of you who joined us today. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you again. Thank you very, very much. Thank you.
It was a privilege that we were here.
Thank you. It was our privilege. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. It was an honor to be with you. Thanks a lot. Danke.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.